Well, it's great to see everyone out tonight. As I look around, I see there's so many amazing producers of art, curators, narrators, historians, teachers. So it's quite an honor to be speaking with Wanda tonight, but also to be speaking with you. So many of you are active contributors to these stories that Wanda and I are trying in different ways to try to present, wrap our heads around, complicate, etc. So I've curated the exhibition Form Follows Fiction, Art and Artists in Toronto at the Art Museum at U of T. So the exhibition continues until December 10th. I'm not going to do a representation of the exhibition, so I'm not going to kind of give you the curatorial premise of the show, but what I have decided to do is to follow a couple of works in the exhibition and then extrapolate from them. So kind of pull a thread of the show and kind of try to weave something here tonight. One of the works in the exhibition that is quite a privilege to be able to exhibit at the Barnicki Gallery U of T is Robert Hoole's, you see it on the screen right now. It's a series of 4 works, and the series is titled Premises for Self-Rule from 1994. So here you see 3 of this larger series installed in the wall together. It's amazing to be able to see these works together. They're scattered in different collections across the country, so to be able to see them together is quite an amazing experience. I won't go a lot into the work, but suffice to say that each of these works refers to a specific piece of legislation that shapes the relationship that we have right now between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. So this is a close-up of one of them that refers specifically to the Constitution Act of 1982. And here's a couple of close-ups just to give you a kind of more intimate sense of what the work looks like. I'm very intrigued by this monochrome panel. I'm very interested in monochromes and the idea of artists making monochromatic painting. The gestures of Robert Hoole's painting, and also these amazing moments where I imagine him using almost like his fingernail and doing these kind of gestural moments that I read as a kind of signature or as at least a kind of imprint of his presence in one specific moment in time. Another work that you see kind of if you turn around and you walk through the archway at the gallery is this work by Gordon Libret, Get Hold of This Space from 1974. I think of it as another kind of monochrome, or it speaks to a certain idea of a kind of non-iconic artistic practice and what the absence of an icon offers artists as a possibility. And this work is shown alongside various historical documents. So here you have the Toronto Purchase from 1787. And remarkably, so the Toronto Purchase is the agreement that was conducted between the Mississauga and the New Credit First Nation and the British Crown that shapes this ground that we're in right now. And what's amazing, for me at least, is to see that the person who drew up the agreement, this document, part of the document has this drawing of the land. So you see on the right-hand side of this manuscript, the familiar shoreline of Lake Ontario. You see, what's now Toronto Island. Before it was an island, when it was a peninsula. It became an island in the 19th century after a storm breached the land bridge, and it's been an island ever since. But the rest of the territory of the land appears as a kind of empty page that's delineated through this act of making a rectangle. And it's amazing for us now, today, to think about what the surveyor who drafted up this document saw and how that surveyor chose to represent what they saw. I imagine a wealth of geographical features, natural life, cultural life, economic life, historical life, etc. And all of this appears as a kind of blankness of this blank page that's delineated in this act of making a rectangle on the sheet of paper. So if you think about the title of the exhibition, Form Follows Fiction, part of the idea of the exhibition is to try to see what are some of the enabling fictions that have shaped the form of the environment that we see around us, that we are actually live and work in every day. Beside that document of the Toronto Purchase is this one of the first urban planning documents. So this was done 2 years after the Toronto Purchase. This is a drawing by John Collins, Plan for the Harbor of Toronto with a Proposed Town and Settlement of 1788. So you see a second fiction coming into the picture, right? You start with the fiction of what I call the vacant lot, you know, the rectangle in a kind of space understood to be empty. And then that's overlaid with a second fiction, the fiction of a grid. And then that's followed by these drawings from 1797 by Sir David William Smith, which are the plans for actually building the settlement. So you see the grid reappearing, and astonishingly, this other document, which has the grid, and you see people's names being inscribed in each little square of the grid. So in a very direct and clear manner, we see this moment of getting hold of this space in a process that Wanda is very right to call colonialism. So just to go back to this Toronto Purchase document, and now I'm kind of going to extrapolate from the exhibition and go on a speculation with you. This drawing reminds me of another historical document that's not in the exhibition, but I'm just going to kind of show it to you. It's this photograph that's in the Toronto, City of Toronto archives from 1957. And it was a photo, it's an aerial view of the city center with this kind of square blanked out of the image. You know, I'm tempted to say Photoshop, but obviously this is the days before Photoshop. But you get the idea. There's a kind of reappearance of a vacant lot in the neighborhood that for a long time was known as the Ward. So one of the city's first working class and immigrant neighborhoods, including immigrants of non-British backgrounds. So the first Chinatown was there, a large black community was there, a Jewish community as well. So what we might identify as the face of immigrant multicultural Toronto today, well, this was the birth of that in the city. And this is registered as a kind of emptiness. This image was presented to the architects who submitted proposals for the international architectural competition to build the new city hall that Villiers Revel eventually won, the Finnish architect. So this image was given to all of the architects who were going to submit drawings so that they could, to help them envision the land on which the building would be built, depicted as empty and blank and as a kind of empty square that you can then do something with. Just thinking about the Lauren Harris exhibition that was here at the AGO only a few months ago this summer, here's a painting of a view from this blank square from the Ward neighborhood in 1911. So this is a view from the ground. There's workers' houses, etc. And in the background, you see the large Eaton's manufacturing building looming kind of in this beautiful golden light. Also, here's a view from the top of that Eaton's manufacturing building looking north at the Ward neighborhood. So you see these houses, etc. So all of this is what in that previous image appears as this kind of blank square. And by the mid-50s, the blank square is being realized. So blocks and blocks of this neighborhood are being razed to the ground so that in the mid-50s they appear as parking lots. This was an image from a group called Panda Associates Architectural Photography from 1962 that was also included in the Lauren Harris exhibition, showing the view of the same building that Lauren Harris had painted about 50 years later, what this environment looked like from the view of a photographer. So now I'll go back to this City Hall image and connect it to a work that is in the Form Follows Fiction exhibition, this series of photographs by Peter McCallum titled Demolition Site. So they document in the early 80s, so about 1980, 81, 82, 83, the intersection of Bathurst and King and the large former industrial building that was at that time through the process of the city's deindustrialization. In the early 80s, this building was occupied by artists and used as artist studios. And Peter McCallum has documented over a few years the gradual demolition of this building and its return to the vacant lot, right? So this image that we saw from the Toronto Purchase is something that I suggest that at the level of our imagination to help us understand something. It's something that recurs over and over again, ahistorically and in a way that I would call allegorically. There's a film by David Anderson that's in the exhibition. It's called Tapperman. And Tapperman might remind you of Superman, like a superhero, but it's also the name of the largest demolition company in Toronto. So I'll just show a few stills just to give you a sense of what the work looks like. So it's quite an amazing and very raw film. You can imagine David Anderson with this little film camera in 1974, walking from Queen and Yonge and just walking north. So it's very shaky film. You know, there's no perfect lighting, no perfect framing. It's just someone walking, holding a film camera and almost scanning the street. So this is a moment, and you see the Teppermen hoarding, protecting viewers, pedestrians, I guess, from the demolition site, but also declaring this moment of demolition happening. And so the buildings in the background are the former Eaton's manufacturing zone that we saw in the Lauren Harris paintings in the moment of being demolished. There's Superman. He superimposed a couple of clips from Superman to kind of imbue this sense, a kind of sense of surreality and this weird idea of a super human, whatever that might mean to us. This amazing view, so this is now where the Eaton Center is. All of these blocks and blocks and blocks of the city are gone. Now it's the Eaton Center. And it's amazing to, like when I first saw this, I was like, oh my God, of course, but it's astonishing to me that you would be able to see the Little Trinity Church from Yonge Street. I've never imagined it. Now it's kind of tucked in the armpit of the Eaton Center. But of course you would be able to see it from Yonge Street because there was a street right there where now is one of the entrances of the mall. I like that I'm very curious about that little person standing there. I kind of imagine them having a premonitionary appearance in one of Lauren Harris's paintings. This is titled In the Ward from 1920, so about 50 years before David Anderson's film. And here I imagine him turning around. This is a photograph by Arthur Goss of one of the inhabitants at 88 Elizabeth Street. So some more people walking. Now that the artist has turned the corner at Dundas, okay, and now we see the view looking south and a couple of people walking around. In order to prepare for this presentation, I took my bike to Yonge Street a couple of days ago and I just photographed. And there you go. So it's an interesting time warp. You start to see that these artists, the work might have been made 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. But so many of the things that are being discussed do hit at something foundational about our experience in the city because they resonate with something that we experience today. So I'll just show you a couple of photographs. This is kind of I love this image. Just seeing the earth. Also those murals, like those, you see kind of previous forms of culture painted on the buildings. They were probably protected by the building that was there before, sandwiched in between. Now that building is gone and I wonder what will happen to those murals. This is a block further south, another vacant lot near where Buddies in Bad Times Theater is. Kind of another view from that same lot. This is a vacant lot at this is where the world's biggest bookstore used to be. Look at the little square on which that poor little tree stands. This is another view of that same lot, also a glimpse of an interesting mural again. And this is Young and College. The tall building in the foreground that kind of occupies most of the field is slated to be demolished. And there's a construction site right now across the street from it. I am curious to see these people walking in front of the photograph. You know, it just feels like Lauren Harris, David Anderson, like these people surrounded by this kind of moment of something changing, right? Something that exists at the moment of its disappearance or burial, to use Wanda's metaphor. So today, this vacant lot has produced a beautiful building, right? Villiers-Revel's new City Hall is a building that I love. It's an astonishing piece of architecture. It's much loved by the city. But it's interesting, what is our relationship to the layers of history that we don't experience as layers, we only experience as presence? But are there ways for us to see this presence as layered, right, with absence? Here's a Goss photograph of that same site. This is from 1912. And recently I just found someone online, Jonathan Paulson, has done, is going back to the location of these older photographs and making a comparison. And this is one way of layering that I find very interesting. Andy Fabo was just at the exhibition the other day, and he was narrating. He let me eavesdrop on his conversation, actually. So he's telling some of the stories of the building that Peter McCallum had documented. And so I feel like this is a precious moment of layering, of hearing someone's stories, so that I can see more in the images that I've selected in the exhibition. Very generous of him to let me participate in that. I'll end with one thing. So here's another mural. This is a painting by Rita Letendre titled Sunrise. This is a photograph of the mural at the Neil Wychick residence on Gerrard East. And a year ago, before the exhibition, Barbara Fisher and I co-organized a conference titled This is Paradise, Art and Artists in Toronto. And during Dwayne's presentation at the conference, he talked about this piece, and I asked him if he would share some images that I can share with you guys today, and he kindly agreed to that. So he visited the site of Rita Letendre's mural, which actually still exists, and yet it doesn't exist. Or it exists in this weird way where it's fully there, and it's a monumental work, right? It's a painting that's like 5, 6, 7 stories high. It's immense, and it's invisible, right? And so just to think of how do we allegorize that? So there's a high-rise building that's built right next to it. The mural exists, and yet is completely invisible. And here we see Dwayne trying to look through the crack to activate the layer, this invisibility as something layered, right? This absence as something layered, as something that you can still connect to somehow. So I'll end with that. Thanks so much. I just wanted to show one more image that Dwayne photographed. We went through the exhibition together, and he took this photograph of the Toronto Purchase document. And I find very interesting that he inverted the signification of this vacant lot. In this case, it's become a mirror. And so, when we talked about kind of artists complicate the pictures, I do find it very fascinating how you can take one metaphor and kind of invert it, switch it, do something else with it, right?
Well, this image of himself, like imposed on the vacant lot, is very much like bare against the wall in a Toronto cityscape in Jeff Thomas's photograph, Cultural Revolution, right? It's like creating presence that is actually present. So it's actually there. It's just you can't see it. And I think like if we keep talking in this vein, like what you're saying is like the vacant lot is not really vacant.
Yeah.
You know, nothing is really buried. It's like it's all here. So why don't we deal with what's here instead of keep talking about what's absent as if it really is absent? It's not. It's right here. We just can't see it in the way that we need to. One thing in relation to this is like both of us treated the Indigenous history of Toronto differently. So you went for the Toronto Purchase and Robert Hoole, and I went for the Jeff Thomas, the land acknowledgement, and all the texts are translated into the language of this land, which is Anishinaabe. So it's kind of interesting. Maybe you can talk about why you began there with that, and why was that even a concern for you?
Yeah, I think this process of learning to see the layers that are not immediately apparent in something is a process, right? And it is a process of learning. And you mentioned it in this metaphor of the tributes and tributaries of kind of seeing what's been buried, right? So I'm coming at it from that perspective of something that is an active investigation and a learning process for me. So seeing, oh my God, Robert Hoole made this amazing work dealing with the legal framework that determines the relationships that I'm in, and that I don't even know what those relationships are, or those, right? So for example, or these historical documents that I'm presenting as kind of, they're historical documents, but they're also allegories in the sense that they contain forms that artists in Toronto seem to come back to over and over again across different generations. In terms of indigeneity, you know, like seeing your practice, like for example, as a curator, and I remember the, oh my God, I'm blanking out, Sovereign Acts exhibition that you curated at U of T, where you proposed that performance art is something that wasn't like invented, you know, whenever, in the 70s, but it's something that Indigenous people have been doing at least for 150 years within a context of colonialism, when people would be kidnapped, taken to Europe, and had to perform nativeness through the courts of Europe, to give one example. And so from that perspective, like doing research and starting to see the Indigenous postmodernism, as I might just call it, when you put together like someone like David Buchan, you know, who's kind of postmodern in the sense that he's doing a kind of queer performance of the self, and you put that alongside Carl Beam or Shelley Nero, who are same generation, very interesting conversations in terms of artistic strategies, but for some reason, the way we frame those works is as like Indigenous is here and white people are over here, and we can't think of them together. But when you actually do look at the work, it reveals correspondences and energies that I think are very productive and very interesting to look at. So that was kind of part of my motivation for that.
That's interesting, me too.